darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator. And in fact, if you think that the only result of this is sexual impurity, later on this week, take a chance to read chapter 2, because at the beginning of chapter 2, Paul lists off a whole bunch of things that are wrong with people as a result of this stuff. And that whole bunch of things includes such items as disobedience to their parents. We're all in this boat. We're all in the same boat. But let me give you some of the blanks to fill out so that you kind of know how the logic progresses. The first thing to recognize is that God made the world so that we would know Him. God made the world so that we would know Him. It says there at the very beginning that what is able to be known about God has been made plain to all of us. His divine power, His eternal nature, these things are plainly made known to us by God. He created the universe in such a way that we should be able to get to know God just by looking at the world around us. We should be able to. That's the way He designed it to work. Now, I know you and I have friends, and they would say things like, well, I just experience God best when I'm walking around in nature. Well, that's all fine and dandy. But the simple truth is that even though that's the way God designed the world to work, it is not the way we have accepted it. Because as you see, the very next thing we see there is that in verse 21, although they knew God, they neither glorified Him as God, nor gave thanks to Him. But their thinking became futile, their foolish hearts were darkened. And at the very end of it, they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. This is the next piece. The next piece is that all of us, human beings, we have rejected the truth of God for our own ideas. The person who likes to meet God by wandering around in the wilderness or wandering around in the forest or looking at the beauty of nature, in many respects what they're doing, unless they're a Christian who's looking at these things from the right perspective, and I don't have time to get into all that stuff, but many times if they're just simply, they don't have Jesus in their life, they just say, hey, I love to be in nature and experience God. What they're experiencing there is beauty. They think it's awesome. They think it's wonderful. But deep down in their hearts, there's been an exchange that has been made. What they are worshiping is not God who gave these things, but they are worshiping the things themselves. This is not just for those people who would build statues and bow down to them. This is for every single one of us. We have worshipped the created things more than the Creator. It's our problem. Some of us love music more than we love worshiping. Some of us love the experience of worship more than we love the God we worship. Some of us love aspects of the Bible more than we love what the Bible calls us to do. Some of us love the love that we receive from others, but find it difficult to love them in Jesus' name. It's very easy for us to exchange what God has given us and accept that, but reject Him. This is a major problem of humanity. We just simply don't have any real good idea of God. I remember not too long ago, I was sitting in the Java roaster over here, and I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine. And while we were in there, getting ready to talk about some discipleship stuff, a friend of his came in. And my friend introduced me to his friend, and we all sat down, and I engaged this new fellow in a conversation, and I was asking him some questions. I said, what do you think about God? Tell me all your thoughts on God, kind of thing. And so he starts telling me some things about his spiritual condition, his spiritual life, what he does, and how he reads the Bible and he reads these other documents, and he just sort of picks and chooses the things that he likes the best. And I said, no, wait a minute, what's that? You said, you pick the things you like the best? He said, yeah, the things that work best, that make most sense to me, that feel good to me, the things I like the best, I just sort of absorb them. And I was thinking to myself, so this guy has one conglomerate faith. It's a menagerie, components of all sorts of different stuff. It is not any real faith that is just an amalgam of other things, and it's all based on what he likes. Now here's the question for you. If there is a real God, and if there is a real heaven, and if there is a real hell, do you think the real God determines who gets into the real afterlife by our amalgamation of ideas with regard to religion? Or do you suppose maybe he's got his own standards that we should learn? Well, that makes more sense. I know you've heard this before. People have been talking about religion in the world, and they've been talking about, okay, how we've got all these different kinds of religions. How do we know which one is the right one? And someone might say this. Well, I think all religions are sort of like the blind men touching an elephant. You've heard this before, I know. There's an elephant in the room, and you've got 6 blind men, and they come in there, and you just say, okay, go, tell us about the animal or creature or thing or whatever it is in this room. One guy goes up over here, and he starts touching something, and he says, well, I'm convinced that what we've got in this room is a tree. It's round, it's rough on the edges, it's very firm and solid. It feels like a tree. I think it's a tree. This other guy's over here, and he's going, okay, wait a minute. This thing is curvy. It's round, but it's curvy. I think what we've got going on here is a snake. It's a big, gigantic python kind of snake. And then there's some other guy way over here on this end, and he says, no, I've got a wispy little thing, and it feels kind of feathery. Maybe it's a paintbrush. Something along those lines. And then there's another guy over here on this end, and he goes, no, it's hard, it's cold, and it's curvy, so maybe we've got like the edge of a sled or something. And so then the super spiritual religious type nuts will say stuff like this. They'll say, they're all right. They're all right. It's an elephant. And they can't see the whole thing, but they are all right from their perspective. It really is like a tree. It really is like a snake. No, the truth is they're all wrong. It's not a snake, a tree, a paintbrush, or a sled. It is an elephant. And unless you can actually see the whole thing for what it is, you can't see anything. That's where our modern world has begun to go off the deep end by saying, okay, listen, everything is cool. But no, God says, listen, you have the opportunity to know me, and you've rejected knowing me for your own thoughts, your own ideas. Here's your next blank. So what God has done, in his wrath, he's released his grip. He's released his grip. Therefore, verse 24, God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to. He gave them over to sexual impurity. And then verse 26, he gives them over to shameful lusts. And then other things. God basically says,